The lawyers preparing as if it's all done.
This is News 5 at 5:30 with Jerry Springer, Norma Rashid, Pat Berry's weather, Ken Broo with sports, and Northern Kentucky Bureau Chief Marty Perret.
Good evening. Another delay tonight in the Pete Rose gambling case. The answer to who will judge Pete has been pushed back for at least another 12 days.
Baseball lawyers want the case handled in federal court. Pete's lawyers want it decided in Hamilton County Court. And the Columbus judge, who has to decide one way or the other, says he won't decide until at least July 17th. News 5's Steve Forrest is in Columbus. He joins us now live. Steve?
Norma, you want a bottom line on this. It's that Pete is apparently safe through at least the All-Star game. There is no way he's going to be tossed out of baseball or even reprimanded through at least July 20th. And his lawyers are working like crazy to make sure that it never happens. Rose's lawyer, Robert Stackler, arrived at the courthouse shortly after noon, saying nothing.
No comment at this time.
But in a 2-hour private meeting, he and lawyers for both baseball and the Reds worked out an agreement with a federal judge to keep Rose on the job while they decide in which court his case against Giamatti belongs. Here's what it says. Giamatti won't hold any hearing for at least the next 2 weeks on whether Rose should be kicked out of baseball for allegedly gambling on baseball games, including those of the Reds. And the Reds agree they won't fire or suspend him while the federal court decides if it should send the case back to Hamilton County Common Pleas Judge Norbert Nadel. Bob, are you pleased that the stipulation is there?
Yeah.
Until at least the 17th.
Because it preserves the status quo and it gives Judge Holschuh an opportunity to decide the case and to review the briefs and the law.
And you can go forward without any worry that Rose is going to be suspended or fired once the Judge Nadel's TRO expires.
The stipulation will speak for itself, and they have agreed not to take any action.
Now, both sides still have to file legal papers. The last papers are due on July 17th. That's 12 days from now. And then Judge John Holschuh says he will take the matter under advisement. So this matter has the potential to drag out through the rest of August, very likely into rest of July, very likely into August, quite possibly until October in the World Series. Not good news any way you look at it. Reporting live from Columbus, Steve Forrest, News 5.
All right, thanks a lot, Steve. And we're preparing more on this latest development and local reaction to it. We'll have that coming
Pete Rose might have his case decided by federal court or by state court, that's Judge Nadel, or by the commissioner. There will ultimately be a decision maker, but some fans have already made up their minds.
I think it's obvious that he's guilty, and it doesn't matter right now anyway. So I believe it should be out of the city of Cincinnati because there's too much public favoritism towards him anyway.
The guy's been framed. I'd like to see him get off.
Other than Pete Rose and Bart Giamatti, the person most affected by this delay is perhaps Judge Norbert Nadel. I contacted the judge's office this afternoon. They had not even gotten official word of the delay from Columbus. But that delay is official, and so the judge will have to wait, along with Pete, along with Bart, along with the fans, and along with a host of lawyers. Jeff Hirsh, News 5.
To recap what's happened today, a federal judge in Columbus has decided to delay his decision on whether a federal court or a Hamilton County court will hear Pete's case. That means a hearing before Hamilton County Judge Norbert Nadel, set for tomorrow, is now canceled. Judge Nadel was scheduled to decide on a preliminary injunction.
Figures because of his alleged gambling habits.
Specifically with a bookie who may have been a member of the New York's Bonanno crime family. News 5 Steve Forrest is in our newsroom to tell us investigators are busy checking out this latest link. Steve?
Yeah, Norma, this gets more and more disturbing every day. Today, NBC reports that sources have identified the bookie named in the report as Val, a bookie to whom Rose reportedly owed thousands of dollars. And while Rose denies dealing with him, NBC says the bookie has direct ties to the mafia. NBC says this man is Val, Richard Troy, a New York bookie indicted earlier this year on gambling charges, along with 33 other men. Rose's former friend, Paul Janszen, says he placed bets with Troy on behalf of Rose. Phone records show Janszen made repeated calls to a number which Troy used in mid-1987. Even more significantly, when police raided Troy's home last October, they seized 2 phone books and a Rolodex. A source familiar with the police investigation says one of the books had the inscription Paul-Rose and listed phone numbers for both Janszen and Janszen's mother. That's important because John Dowd's report into Rose's alleged gambling says Janszen's mother got a phone call threatening her son's life unless he paid off Rose's $68,000 gambling debt to Val. The source says, quoting, "This finishes the loop, meaning it provides a final tie between Rose, Janszen, and Troy." Now, when it is interviewed with John Dowd, Rose denies knowing who Val is. That is the same interview where he admits using a bookie to place football and basketball bets, despite his public statements that he never used a bookie to bet on any sport. Norma.
And then he continues to say he never bet on baseball.
That's right. He says he bet on football, the Super Bowl. He said he bet on the NCAAs 2 years ago, but he says he never bet on hockey, and he definitely...
To be done in as professional and, as I say, impartial and fair a manner as humanly possible.
Was it a shock?
It has so many ways in which it is now reminiscent of a job I used to have in another place that I sometimes wonder what has been gained in the swap. So it isn't a question I ask in the sense of, oh my goodness, what am I in? I have a very strong sense of what I'm in, and therefore perhaps I ask it.
Has gotten even more complicated. Lawyers for Baseball Commissioner Bart Giamatti have just filed papers in federal court suggesting Giamatti is the one who won't get a fair shake if the case is sent back to a county court here. News 5's Steve Forrest is live at the stadium. Steve, this is a new approach they're taking.
Yeah, definitely a new approach. The lawyers for Giamatti are fighting back very hard. They're trying to convince that federal judge in Columbus that he should keep the case and not return it back here to Common Pleas Court. They say if the judge is interested in true fairness, it's the only decision he can make.
One way or the other.
Last night before the All-Star game, Giamatti took the hard line, saying there's no way he'll step aside as judge and jury in the Rose affair.
Bart, at any time, have you considered withdrawing from the investigation?
Me? Absolutely not. No. No.
At any time, was there a compromise solution offered to Pete Rose?
No. No.
And today, his lawyers took the hard line, saying the Rose case should be heard in a federal, not state court. They say the commissioner has the right to investigate and decide whether Rose bet on baseball games, saying gambling is the capital crime of baseball. It infects the game's integrity and sickens honest participants and fans. They're also questioning whether Norbert Nadel, the judge who said Giamatti might be prejudiced against Rose, may be prejudiced himself in favor of Rose. They cite the order from federal judge Carl Rubin transferring the case to Columbus because of Rose's local fame and notoriety. Plainly, they say, this same local prejudice must weigh much more heavily on a state court judge who must be elected and re-elected by the citizens. If ever it were appropriate to remove a case to the federal court to avoid such local pressures, Giamatti's lawyers conclude, this, they say, is the case. The ultimate issue in the case, say the lawyers for Giamatti, is the commissioner's ability to protect the integrity of baseball. Reporting live from Riverfront Stadium, Steve Forrest, News 5.
I suspect Rose and his lawyers, of course, would disagree.
Yeah, I think that's a real safe assumption, Jerry. As a matter of fact, it's their turn now to respond to the legal brief that was filed today. Those papers have to be filed up in Columbus by next week, next Tuesday, I believe. And at that point, next Monday, rather, at that point, Judge Holschuh will get to make the final decision. Don't expect a quick one, though.
Commissioner Bart Giamatti should...
Rose's chief
Columbus lawyers for both Pete and professional baseball met late today with a federal judge. News 5's Steve Forrest is there. He joins us now to tell us there are still no concrete answers to the question of what happens next.
Yeah, no concrete answers, Norma, but plenty of legal maneuvering today in a courtroom here in Columbus. You know, this case is getting so bogged down in legal minutia that sometimes we tend to forget why we're even here. At stake is whether Rose's case against Giamatti should be heard in a state or federal court. All of it following the report from Special Investigator John Dowd, where he concludes that Rose bet on baseball games, including those of the Reds. Dowd was in Columbus today, as were lawyers for both sides. They came to federal court to present their latest arguments to Judge John Holschuh. Baseball's lawyer said the case should be moved. Lewis Hoynes telling the judge Giamatti is viewed with suspicion in Cincinnati as a foreigner from New York, trapped in an ivory tower.
I think that's a terrible mistake. The commissioner has taken this task on very reluctantly. It's nothing that he gets any joy or pleasure out of at all. It's an extremely difficult and agonizing time for him, but he has a job to do. He's pledged to do that job, and he certainly wants to go on and do it, but I think his role has been widely misunderstood in Cincinnati, and frankly, I think that's a good reason why we should be in federal court and here in Columbus.
Rose's lawyer, Robert Stackler, spent much of his time saying the Reds should be every bit as much of a defendant as Giamatti. He said the Reds belong in the lawsuit because the Reds, not Giamatti, would actually be the ones to fire Rose if he's banned from baseball. And that, he says, would be a breach of Rose's 2-year, $1 million contract with the team. Now, Judge Holschuh is saying that after hearing both sides, the case deserves careful attention. That is legal shorthand for saying any final decision is going to take a while. He says he's going to try and reach this decision by a week from this coming Monday, the end of the month. Live in Columbus, Steve Forrest, News 5. Norma?
Steve, just to get this straight, who wins depending on which way Holschuh rules?
It's kind of complicated, Norma. If the judge says it stays in federal court, that's a clear victory for baseball. If, on the other hand, he sends it back to Hamilton County Common Pleas Court, back to Judge Nadel, Rose's lawyers are going to be very, very happy.
And of course, we'll continue to follow this. Obviously, it's going to be a long, drawn-out process, and we'll keep following it every inch. Columbus lawyers for both.
Columbus, Denise.
Yeah, we'll be looking for that. Came down. He's there now live. Steve, what's this one mean?
Well, it means that the decision shoots a big hole through what's been the major thrust of Rose's defense, as well as his efforts to keep the case before Hamilton County Common Pleas Judge Norbert Nadel. It says when you boil down this case, the argument is between Rose and Commissioner Giamatti and nobody else. And that is what Rose's defenders did not want to hear. The decision is a clear defeat for Rose. 2 weeks ago, his lawyers had argued that the case belonged in state, not federal court, saying the Reds were a necessary defendant, as necessary as Commissioner Giamatti himself. But Judge John Holschuh says in today's decision that Rose fraudulently made the Reds a defendant in the case. He writes, in reality, there is no controversy between Rose and the Cincinnati Reds. Thus, he says, the case belongs in federal court.
I'm very pleased. It would surprise you if I were not, I'm sure, but I'm very pleased.
Giamatti's lawyer, Lou Hoynes, got the good news here in Columbus. He called Holschuh's decision perfectly correct. But in Cincinnati, Rose's lawyer and friend Reuben Katz issued a statement saying, "We have not yet reviewed Judge Holschuh's extensive opinion. We will do so in the next day or so. Then we will decide on our course of action." Probably include an appeal to the Sixth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals in Cincinnati. So the irony here is that the case will probably come back to Cincinnati sometime very soon, although definitely not to the courtroom that Rose would have liked. Reporting live in Columbus, Steve Forrest, News 5.
Steve, what happens to that order that the Reds are prevented from taking any disciplinary action against Pete? What happens to that now?
It's going to be extended for 2 weeks to August 14th by Judge Holschuh's orders. That would probably be the day, if there's no appeal, that the hearing on the preliminary injunction would go before Judge Holschuh.
All right, thanks a lot, Steve. Of course, we're still gathering reaction to this big decision, and we'll have that for you on News 5 coming up at 6.
Joins us now. He's been listening to a lot of the comments and is here now to share them with us.
Talk about deja vu, huh?
Yeah.
How many rulings now for Pete? Seems countless. We've had court rulings on Pete, it seems like all summer long. The whole legal battle starting to become as long as the season itself. And the arguments are becoming as familiar as the starting lineup. Now, here's what everyone is saying today.
Right off the bat, the reaction from Pete is pretty predictable. Here's his quote. "I want an impartial decision maker. The rest is up to the lawyers. Today's decision doesn't affect me one way or the other." The other main player in all this, the baseball commissioner, Bart Giamatti, had this to say.
Well, I've always thought it belonged in the federal courts, and so I think that that's the appropriate place.
Is this a setback for Pete?
Well, I think it is a setback for Pete Rose in that it delays the issue of whether or not this is heard in state court. The interesting thing about Judge Holschuh's ruling is that he has allowed Pete Rose's attorneys to appeal his decision.
When asked about that today, Pete's attorney, Reuben Katz, would only make this statement, and it's a quote. "We have not yet reviewed Judge Holschuh's extensive opinion. We will do so in the next day or so. Then we will decide on our next course of action." Meanwhile, the public seems to want this over with.
I think it'll get a fair review now that it's in federal court, and there won't be as much, let's call it, community pressure, I guess would be the best way to describe it.
I think they're just stalling for time. His lawyers are just stalling for time.
I think that it should go to federal court. I hope that everything comes out as fairly as possible and back Pete all the way.
One more reaction we need to pass along, this from Marge Schott, who says she just hopes the situation is resolved soon and that the players and fans can get back to enjoying the game of baseball, which I think is pretty much a universal acclamation. How realistic, I don't know. It will go on at least until the 14th of August.
The amazing thing here is all this legal stuff has to do with whether and who's going to find out whether or not Giamatti is biased or not. None of this has to do with whether or not Pete gambled on baseball.
And it certainly doesn't preclude the deal that we've been talking about here tonight that may or may not come off before this thing goes back
to his court.
That's from the federal case. And the story over the weekend. It quotes Pete as saying he bet sports other than baseball with a bookie, saying it was more of a convenience than anything else. He admitted it may be illegal, but said, "I'm not the only one who's doing something wrong." Bart Giamatti's assistant commissioner, Faye Vincent, says they may have to take new action against Rose, adding Rose's admissions, if it were any other person, would be subject to actions by baseball. Well, News 5 spoke with Pete Rose today about that article. He says he doesn't understand all the uproar. He was only elaborating on deposition testimony that was already made public. His only regret is using the word convenient.